The living room smelled faintly of artificial pine and cinnamon candles, the same scents my mother had used every Christmas since I was a child. I sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor, bits of wrapping paper scattered around me, my palms pressed to my knees to keep them from shaking. "Your very own BMW," my father announced, his voice thick with pride as he dangled a key fob in front of Colton. My brother leapt to his feet, eyes wide, hair falling perfectly into place as though the moment had been staged. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of the car in the driveway, a glossy white machine crowned with a bow so enormous it nearly obscured the windshield. Blue satin shimmered under the pale Oregon sun. My mother clasped her hands beneath her chin as if she were watching a miracle. Colton grinned and spun the keys like a magician with a coin. I could almost hear the unspoken chorus. He had arrived. He had been chosen. He was worthy. Across my lap rested a cartoonish piggy bank, the kind sold in discount bins near the checkout line. A small sticker on its underside read $4.99, though my parents hadn't even bothered to peel it off. My mother urged me to open it. I turned the stopper, and 2 worn bills fluttered into my palm. $5. My father chuckled, waving his hand. "A start for your future home fund. You've always been the responsible one." "Elara." Colton leaned down, pressing a perfumed shoulder against mine, and whispered he'd give me a ride in the BMW whenever I needed. I placed the piggy bank carefully on the coffee table, its hollow shell knocking against the glass. The sound rang louder than their laughter, louder than my own silence, as I excused myself and walked toward the stairs. The carpet muffled my steps as I climbed the stairs, but every creak of the railing felt like an accusation. On the wall above me, a gallery of framed photographs stretched in perfect alignment: birthdays, vacations, graduations. Colton's grin filled nearly every frame in soccer uniforms. At prom, beside European landmarks my parents had proudly funded, my own appearances were fewer, tucked into the corners like afterthoughts. I closed the bathroom door and turned the lock with a click that sounded louder than it should have. The mirror above the sink threw back my reflection, pale under the harsh light, eyes dry when they should have been spilling. I pressed my palms to the cold counter, steadying myself against a swell of anger I hadn't allowed to surface before. Images flickered behind my eyes. High school graduation, where I delivered the valedictorian speech to a half-empty row because my parents had driven across town to watch Colton's junior varsity soccer game. College nights at the campus bookstore and cafeteria, 25 hours a week while I juggled classes, stretching scholarships and loans. Meanwhile, Colton sketched in cafes across Europe, bills quietly wired by the same people who now claimed they never had money to spare. "You always manage on your own," they used to say. At first, I wore it like a compliment. Later, I learned it was their excuse. My independence was simply their license to give him more. The piggy bank with its 5 limp dollars burned in my memory, not because of its smallness, but because of what it confirmed. Nothing had changed. Not my degrees, not my promotions, not the years of proving myself. I whispered to the mirror, voice tight. Maybe this Christmas will be different, but the woman staring back at me knew better. Her silence had been their permission, and it had gone on too long. I straightened, turned off the light, and stepped back into the hallway where Colton's smile followed me down the frames. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the heater cycling on and off. I lay in my childhood bed, staring at the ceiling where the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck there at 12 still clung in fading patches. No matter how I shifted, sleep refused to come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Colton twirling those keys, the blue bow gleaming in the window, my parents' faces lit with pride I had never earned. At 3 o'clock, I swung my legs over the side of the bed. The floorboards groaned softly, but no one stirred. I opened the closet and pulled out my old duffel, the one that had followed me from dorm rooms to apartments. Into it, I placed only what mattered: the stuffed bear my grandmother had pressed into my arms the week before she died, a photo album from college filled with people who had believed in me, and the blueprint of the first building I ever designed, creased from years of unfolding and refolding, still smelling faintly of ink. Downstairs, the tree lights blinked in steady rhythm, illuminating the neatly wrapped gifts I had bought them: the leather briefcase for Dad, the silver bracelet for Mom, the camera lens Colton had casually mentioned. I set them carefully at the base of the tree, unwilling to carry them with me, but unable to strip away the effort I had made. In the kitchen, I removed my key from the ring and placed it beside the coffee maker, its metal catching the light like a quiet declaration. Outside, my Corolla waited, scarred with miles but loyal. I slid behind the wheel, turned the ignition, and eased onto the street as snow began to fall. Headlights cut through the darkness, I-5 stretching south like an escape route drawn just for me. For the first time, I felt the air inside my chest expand, not with fear, but with the fragile shape of possibility. The highway stretched ahead in dark silence, only the wiper's rhythm and the hiss of tires over wet pavement breaking the quiet. I had been driving for hours when my phone lit up on the console. A new voicemail blinked. Against my better judgment, I pressed play. My father's voice erupted, sharp and commanding. "Ilara, return the car immediately or we'll report it stolen. This childish behavior has gone far enough." I nearly laughed, the sound raw in my throat. The Corolla, the same one I had bought outright, title in my name. Payments scraped together over years of double shifts was the one thing they could never claim. And still, here was my father, ready to twist ownership into theft, willing to weaponize a lie if it meant pulling me back under their thumb. The anger came first, hot and uncontainable, but underneath it lay something colder, clearer. This was who they had always been: control at any cost. By dawn, I crossed into southern Oregon. Fatigue gnawed at me, and a neon sign flashing open lured me off the highway. The diner smelled of coffee and bacon, the kind of place where the vinyl booths stuck to your skin and the waitresses called you honey. One of them, a woman with silver streaks in her hair and lines etched deep from years of smiling and frowning alike, poured me a mug without asking. "Rough night," she said, more statement than question. "Rough life," I muttered before I could stop myself. She set the pot down and looked me over with the calm of someone who had seen every kind of heartbreak pass through her doors. "Blood makes you related. Love makes you family." The words landed heavy, then sank deeper, like a seed dropped into soil I hadn't known was there. I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the heat seep into my fingers, and for the first time since pulling away from Portland, I felt less alone. I finished my coffee, left a tip larger than I could afford, and stepped back into the cold morning, the road to California calling me forward. Crossing into California felt like stepping into a different version of myself, though the Corolla rattled just the same. By the time I reached San Francisco, exhaustion pressed on my shoulders, but the city's skyline glittered against the bay like a promise I hadn't dared make to myself. I parked in front of a pale green Victorian on a quiet street, clutching the address I'd texted only hours earlier. The door swung open before I knocked. Ilara Marisol's voice carried the warmth I hadn't heard in months. My college roommate pulled me inside, her curls damp from a shower, her arms strong around me. She didn't ask why I had shown up with a duffel bag and hollow eyes. She just said, "Family doesn't treat family like that," and pointed me toward the spare room. I slept 12 hours straight. When I woke, sunlight spilled across unfamiliar walls, and something in me felt lighter. Over steaming mugs of coffee, Marisol coaxed the story out, listening without judgment. When I finished, she leaned forward. "Then you're staying here until you figure out what comes next." No arguments. What came next arrived faster than I expected. Within a week, I requested a transfer to the San Francisco office of my engineering firm. My supervisor approved without hesitation, And suddenly I wasn't drifting. I was rebuilding. Marisol insisted I see someone, sliding a card across the kitchen table, Dr. Elaine Levine, Ph.D., in her office, filled with shelves of worn books and the scent of lemon polish. I finally said the word out loud, favoritism. Dr. Levine didn't flinch. She nodded, as if naming it was the first act of defiance I needed. One Saturday, Marisol dragged me to a pottery class. I protested until my hands sank into the cool clay. It resisted, then yielded, and by the end I had shaped a crooked little bowl, ugly and beautiful all at once. I couldn't stop staring at it. It was proof that imperfect beginnings still held form. That night, I took the piggy bank from my bag and slid a $5 bill inside. The sound of the bill catching in the hollow plastic was louder than I expected, like a marker struck against the air. I decided I'd add one each week, not as a reminder of their insult, but as a measure of the life I was finally building. When Marisol asked how long I planned to stay, I looked at her across the table, the piggy bank between us, and said, "As long as it takes." It didn't take long for the rumors to find me. Old co-workers from Portland sent cautious messages, asking if I was all right, saying they'd heard I'd had a breakdown. One even hinted I'd joined some strange group in California. The absurdity would have made me laugh if it didn't sting so sharply. My parents were spinning their narrative, and people were believing it. Colton wasn't subtle either. His Instagram filled with photos of him leaning against the BMW, blue bow still draped dramatically across the hood. Captions bloated with hashtags, "Tar Success," "Dream Car." Blessed glowed under likes from family, friends, and neighbors. In the comments, Mom cheered him on. Dad added a line about hard work paying off. They might as well have carved my absence into stone. But in San Francisco, the story looked different. My team lead pulled me aside after I presented new calculations that cut weeks off a high-rise project schedule. "Brilliant work, Ilara," he said, and meant it. Colleagues nodded, eyes warm with respect that I had craved for years but never received at home. I left the office that day with a lightness in my step, the city buzzing around me like an affirmation. Still, when night fell and the apartment grew quiet, the guilt seeped in. I'd lie awake wondering if I had abandoned them, if maybe I was selfish. Dr. Levine helped me strip away the disguise on those feelings. "That isn't love," she said calmly. "It's emotional control disguised as love, perhaps even felt as love by them, but its purpose is to bind you, not free you." The words landed like a stone tossed into deep water, rippling outward until they touched everything. My family's approval had never been proof of my worth. Their disappointment was never evidence of my failure. Naming it didn't erase the ache, but it carved out space where belief in myself could take root. The next week, I slid another $5 bill into the piggy bank and heard the faintest echo of strength in the hollow plastic, as if each bill carried the weight of my refusal to be diminished. The envelope arrived on a Thursday, wedged between bills and grocery flyers, heavy ivory paper, my name written in looping calligraphy. No +1 offered. I turned it over in my hands until the weight of it felt heavier than it should have been. Cousin Vanessa was getting married in Portland, and I was expected to attend. For days, I left it on the counter, unopened, its presence filling the apartment like a question I didn't want to answer. When I finally told Dr. Levine, she tilted her head. "Avoiding isn't the same as healing," she said. "Sometimes the only way to test your boundaries is to stand inside them." I booked a room at a downtown hotel that same afternoon. When my father called, insisting I stay at the family's rental house with everyone else, I answered with silence until his voice cracked into anger. "Suit yourself," he spat before hanging up. For the first time, I didn't rush to smooth it over. The following weekend, Marisol helped me choose a dress. Midnight blue silk, tailored to skim without apology. I caught my reflection in the mirror and saw the echo immediately, the same blue once tied into a bow around Colton's BMW. But this time it was mine, worn like armor instead of humiliation. Boundaries are the message, Marisol reminded me, tugging at the hem to check the length. You don't have to explain them. You just live them. On the flight north, I pressed my forehead to the window, watching the Pacific coast vanish beneath the clouds. My pulse quickened, not from dread, but from the strange electricity of walking back into a battlefield on my own terms. By the time the plane descended into Portland's winter fog, I knew I was no longer arriving as the daughter who left with nothing but a duffel bag. I was stepping back as someone who had built a life without them, and that difference was the only armor I needed. The knock came just after the rehearsal dinner ended. Aunt Martha found me in the corridor, her expression pinched. Your parents asked to see you. The library. I followed her through the warren of hallways until I reached the heavy oak door. Inside, my father paced near the fireplace. My mother sat upright in a high-backed chair, and Colton leaned against the window frame, arms crossed. The air felt staged, rehearsed. We need to talk as a family, my mother began, her voice trembling just enough to suggest fragility. Your father lost his job. My health has been fragile. We've been forced to consider selling the house. All of this started when you left. Colton's eyes burned into me. Do you have any idea what your silence has done? They're falling apart. I let the accusations hang before setting my bag on the table. From it, I pulled an album, flipping it open so the pages lay flat. Birthday parties his elaborate, mine meager. Graduations my speech ignored, his soccer games celebrated. Vacations him center stage, me pushed to the margins. This isn't imagination, I said evenly. It's a pattern. My father scoffed, but his face reddened as I laid out the next piece, my student loan statements. $70,000 worth of debt, contrasted with Colton's fully funded education and European semester. You always managed, my mother whispered. Managed doesn't mean unworthy, I answered, my voice steady. Then I reached for the final item, the piggy bank. I opened the stopper, and dozens of crisp $5 bills spilled across the polished wood, sliding into a messy pile between us. One for every week since Christmas. A record of what you thought I was worth, and what I've learned to claim for myself. Colton's bravado cracked. His gaze shifted from the bills to my face, and for the first time, he said nothing. I straightened. If there's any chance of reconciliation, it requires two things: family therapy and respect for my boundaries. Otherwise, this is the last meeting we'll ever have. The night air was cool on the terrace, roses climbing the stone wall and carrying their faint sweetness into the silence between us. Colton leaned against the railing, his shoulders hunched in a way I'd never seen. For once, he didn't look like the golden sun who always knew where the spotlight fell. I had to let the BMW go, he said finally, his voice rough. Couldn't keep up with the payments. Credit cards are maxed out. Clients dried up. I'm drowning. Ilara, the old version of me would have jumped in, offering money, making calls, rearranging my life to catch him before he fell. Instead, I let the words sit. I studied his face, the desperation in it, and felt a strange mix of sadness and distance. I'm sorry you're going through that, I said quietly. He blinked, surprised. I don't know what to do, he admitted, his bravado unraveling. I can help you put together a budget, I offered. That's all I can do. The rest you'll have to figure out. He stared at me, waiting for more, waiting for the safety net that had always appeared. When it didn't, his shoulders slumped, but he nodded. Something passed between us, then recognition. Maybe that I was no longer the person who carried his weight without question. Through the terrace doors, I heard whispers drifting from the ballroom. Relatives murmured about my parents selling the house. speculating about money troubles and debts hidden for years. The news landed heavy, but it didn't crush me. Their choices had led them here. For once, I was not the fixer. I was simply a witness, free to feel sorrow without surrendering myself to repair what was broken. I turned back toward the golden glow of the ballroom, ready to face what still lay ahead. The scent of rosemary and sage drifted from the oven, mingling with the sound of laughter spilling from my living room. Around my table sat colleagues from the firm, neighbors from the building, and Marisol, who had insisted on bringing 2 pies despite my protests. The clink of glasses and easy rhythm of conversation filled the apartment in a way I had never known during the holidays back home. On the mantel, the piggy bank stood proudly, no longer a symbol of insult, but of persistence. Its weight had grown over the months, stuffed with crisp $5 bills, each one a reminder of the weeks I had chosen myself. Sometimes I caught my guests glancing at it, curious, but I never felt the need to explain. Its meaning was mine alone. Partway through dinner, my phone buzzed. Colton's face appeared on the screen. Thinner, wearier, but steadier. He wore a uniform shirt from a delivery company, the hum of a diner behind him. Just wanted to say, "Merry Christmas." He said, "I'm working doubles, but it's good for me." There was no arrogance in his tone, only humility. I wished him well, and when the call ended, I felt a quiet sense of balance. Later, as we cleared dishes, a text arrived from my mother. Attached was a photo of my old dollhouse, dusty but intact, sitting on a folding table. Beneath it, deed paperwork bore my name. Her message was brief. "It always belonged to you." When the last of the guests left, I stepped onto the balcony, the bay stretching out beneath the night sky, bridges glimmering like threads of light. Wrapping a shawl around my shoulders, I whispered into the still air, "Worth isn't given, it's claimed."